And that's the origin story of the... I'm an idiot. Out in the wild, I managed to come across the Riddler here. The more fear-inducing version of the character, modeled after the likes of genuine serial killers like the Zodiac Killer is probably the one that's most referenced here, so they're definitely taking it in a much more horror-driven direction, played here by Paul Dano in this interpretation. And like before, I'll have an affiliate link in the description below if you guys want to order your own The Riddler, and you can add them to your McFarlane Toys collection while at the same time supporting the channel quite a bit. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this version of the Riddler terrorizing Batman, or at least terrorizing him for a whopping 3 hours. But as long as it could keep me at the edge of my seat during those 3 hours, I'm all for it. And here we have the McFarlane Toys for the Riddler. And from what I can tell, they actually got quite a good amount of the sculpting for the character done really well, except there's really not much coming forth in the sense of a challenge, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like, he keeps the costume so simple that if you were to look for a Riddler figure, you're not really gonna be getting much, except for a couple of details that are interesting to note when I was playing this figure first and foremost. But as you can see, he's got the new version or the new look of the Riddler, which is mainly going to be modeled after the Zodiac Killer, with a trench coat of some kind, ideally green. It's gonna have like this slimy kind of avocado green, or at least an avocado that's gone bad for a few days. But most notably, I would say it's the fact that it's a short trench coat or a short raincoat that is very malleable, very easy for him to be able to get around without being able to be slowed down during his killings or his many, many morbid games that he's playing on the Batman. Followed by very traditional pants with the creases. You know, they got the molding pretty well done and suited for the pants, as well as the texture going around the pockets around the side of the pants. I noticed that there's a slight difference in texture amongst the knee joints, but we'll get to that as we tackle the articulation. And then it's when we get to the jacket that, in my opinion, I feel is probably where most of the detail kind of shines a little better, because the jacket is made out of different parts. Obviously, the sleeves of the jacket are going to be made out of the plastic that then creates the arms in this sense. But it's when we get to the torso that, of course, they made a separate piece made out of rubber, out of a very sturdy rubber, to then kind of give us our properly molded raincoat that looks rather well. You know, it gets the job done. It looks pretty creepily. Of course, my favorite detail out of the entire ensemble is the pocket that he has right here. Of course, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of story explanation they use for this, because in hindsight, or using logic, so to speak, you would think that being a serial killer, you wouldn't want to really brandish your outfit here, unless you're a, sociopathic narcissist, that you wouldn't want to brandish your whole ensemble here with the one thing that people are looking after, which is, of course, the question mark with a reticle on it. So I'm hoping that there's some kind of explanation. But of course, they also, for comic book purposes, they have to make it clear that this is in fact the Riddler character, and therefore he's gonna have something that has the question mark on it right there, and that's probably what they were able to come up with, because no way in hell was he gonna look like Jim Carrey did in Batman Forever. But whether it be in the design of the character overall for the movie or in figure form here, I'm happy to report that my favorite part is done really beautifully, which is the head sculpt, because out of everything that you could say for the new design of the Riddler, you cannot say you don't feel unease by the look of the character's mask, with a translucent kind of plastic shell covering the back of his head, and then in the front is this handmade, very grimy looking mask that's made out of like duct tape and green rubber pieces and all this other stuff. And then to add a little touch of personality is, of course, the glasses that are then kind of retrofitted into the mask around the eye holes. And the figure version here by McFarlane Toys was actually able to do a very fascinating job of being able to reinterpret that head mold as well, because that's arguably my favorite part of this figure right here. Not only because you got the translucent plastic kind of giving us a look into the character's kind of head physical features inside, with a little bit of hair detail inside, except of course it's going to look a little murky, so you can't tell if it's actual true hair definition or if it's warping of the translucent plastic that's kind of giving off that illusion. And then furthermore, looking at him straight forward, you can see that they did etch out and paint the eyes behind the glasses, but you're not going to get any more details than that. And to have that kind of look, that kind of ominous atmosphere around the head sculpt still being coming through in figure form is really fascinating to me. Now, even though the Riddler, not only this version, but pretty much any version that we've ever gotten in the history of Batman, is not known to be a very physical and agile villain that Batman goes toe-to-toe at in terms of combat. It's more about the methodical prowess that Edward Nigma, or as he's being called, Edward Nashton, I believe, in the Batman, because, you know, Enigma is probably a little too much on the comic book side for that kind of version of the movie or the character. But he's meant to play mental games with Batman more so than actual physical fights. So I never really expected for even McFarlane to give him the form of articulation that you would expect a character like Batman himself to have. But nevertheless, the somewhat 22 points of articulation are still kind of found on the figure itself, except with a couple of limitations. And then one other that I thought of myself is probably a defect on mine, but I will definitely keep an eye out to see if anybody else reports different. The head can move left to right, except I'm greeted with a little bit of resistance right about there. Now, granted, it could also be because of the tightness of the back translucent piece as well as the front part of the mask that could be tightening on the joint slightly. So he is going to stop a little bit there, and it's also kind of meeting the back part of the hood right there. So you could be facing some limitations there, but he does rotate left and right slightly, as you can see right there, and then pivots slightly up and down. Not the greatest movement that I've had in a McFarlane thus far, but it is somewhat present. Then we get to the ball joints on the shoulders, which of course do the traditional thing of being able to move vertically as well as inwards and outwards about that far. There is a secondary joint inside that's still present. Of course, it's not as movable as other characters. And then we have the bicep swivel that was a little stiff at first, but still gets the job done right about right there. Two joints at the elbow. Now, mine had a little bit of looseness on the top one, but both did become accessible over time right there. So you do get very clear cuts that kind of break a little bit of the illusion right there, but the elbow joint is still ever so present on both arms. And then we actually get a wrist joint that not only moves horizontally 360 degrees, but vertically, or at least on a x-axis, left and right, as you see right there. And the reason why I say it was a little surprising is because I've tackled other McFarlanes where the design of the cuffs of this kind of outfit, whether they're wearing a suit like the three Jokers, Clown and Criminal, or other characters, this cuff area has always become a hindrance to that joint. But for some reason, they actually got it right here with the Riddler. He's able to actually flex the wrists inwards and outwards, much more free-flowing than other characters have, and still retain this kind of design for the outfit. So I thought that was a pretty fascinating detail for Riddler here to have. Of course, no torso articulation of almost any kind due to the way that this jacket is designed. I tried filling up in there and nothing is moving whatsoever, as well as no waist articulation. So I guess you could argue that that's already 2 points lost. So you're only really dealing with about 20 points of articulation in the description of the figure. So McFarlane, you might have to change that up. When we get to the legs, you do have a joint, that somewhat patented McFarlane joint that I've only noticed in McFarlane figures, still being retained here at the top of the leg, so he can kind of extend the legs outwards about that far, only because of the way that the jacket is then holding them together, and then similarly only about that much forward, and then that much back. So you're not expecting Riddler to do the Jean-Claude Van Damme split here anytime soon, but of course, like I said, why would he? Then we get to the knees. They are a little bit on the stiffer side, but I managed to get both of them moving freely with the two joints present right about right there, as you can see. So still coming through right there, of course, with very visible cuts right there in the molding of the plastic, so do be careful. And then we get to my first major issue with the figure, but it could be an isolated incident, which are the ankles. Perhaps it is that during his off time, Riddler spends a little bit too much on that Gotham basketball court, and he's been losing an awful lot because his ankles are super wobbly, that they've been getting the work. And I've checked to see one of them was actually a little undone, so I had to pop it back in properly to give it that popping noise and have it flush with the rest of the boot piece that's here on the bottom, because this entire boot piece is actually made out of 2 different pieces. And the bottom is the traditional McFarlane shoe. But the ankles on my Riddler are frankly a little too loose for wear, I'm afraid. So moving them horizontally can still be done, but as you can see, one little nudge and they're already going in either direction. So there's not much stiffness going on to them, especially on his right. This, the ankle right here, you can kind of see right there that one slight little gesture can actually have it be moving all about. Right out of the box, this ankle was actually in the twisted form like this, so I don't know if maybe it was because of the machine that packed him in, put it in there a little too aggressively, that maybe it worn out the ankle somewhat, but both ankles feel very, very loose on my end. I don't know if anybody has come across McFarlane Toys The Batman 2022 Riddler here, but if you do, let me know in the comments if yours came with loose ankles after some harsh b-ball games outside of the school, and he was probably ruffled up by a couple of guys who were up to no good, started making trouble in the neighborhood. And that's the origin story of the I'm an idiot. But those ball joints are still present that allow the ankles to move horizontal as well as pivot slightly up and down. Actually, not even slightly. He gets very significant cuts going down when flexing the ankle backwards. As you can see right there, it can actually move backwards about that far back and then that much inwards or up. And then, of course, he does have the toe articulation a little stiff on this one, but it is still present as well as on the other foot, right about right there. But as you can see, it's becoming a little bit of struggle to even tackle the toes, considering how loose these ankles are. And make no mistake, that did also cause a little bit of a chore to get him to stand properly without resorting to using that little disc circular base that McFarlane always throws with their figures. McFarlane also threw in just one extra accessory for the Riddler. He likes to keep things a little bit on the simpler side. At first, I didn't know what this was, admittingly. I thought it was like a detector of some kind. Maybe the Riddler was a Ghostbuster during his off time, but turns out that this is an ice picker. I gotta be honest, I've never seen an ice picker of this kind. Maybe they went with a slightly more neutralized form of an ice picker, and maybe when we see the movie he'll use a more traditional one because it's very reminiscent of what an actual serial killer would use, but McFarlane doesn't want any trouble on their hands, so they went with something that looks more spatula based as opposed to a general ice picker. Because when I saw this, I did not think of ice picker. Did you guys think ice picker when seeing this? Let me know in the comments, because I personally didn't. Nevertheless, it is a molded piece of plastic with a couple of indentations on the handle to make it seem like it's grippable, and he does have at least one hand molded and retrofitted to hold said ice picker in place. Of course, do be careful, because fitting it in, you kind of have to be a little fidgety with it, since a few of the fingers are a little bit more closed off than the index and the thumb, so you kind of have to wiggle it in there from top to bottom, so to speak, and that will get the ice picker firmly put in place. And as you can see right there, Riddler is ready to do his bidding until he gets caught. And even if he gets caught, how do you know that wasn't part of the plan the whole time, as we saw from bits and pieces of that trailer? So nevertheless, I'm enjoying what they're doing with the Riddler as far as his interpretation, and it looks like McFarlane Toys mostly hit it out of the park. Again, I have a couple of concerns with these ankles that I got, whether they were isolated incidents or not. Could have used maybe at least one other accessory. In fact, I would have kind of went for the roll of duct tape or the roll of police tape that he has in that trailer, because even the back of the box showcases him with the trading card that McFarlane Toys always come with, showcases him with said tape. So the fact that he only came with what is being called an ice picker, I was a little bummed out that he didn't come with that secondary accessory. I would have appreciated that a little bit more, but at least they got some of the finer details that makes me enjoy this version of the Riddler even more good, as far as the detailing on the jacket or the rain jacket, and more so the sculpting of the face that's genuinely terrifying. But is he an absolute must-own? I would say that more so if you are planning on completing your entire list or set of McFarlane Toys for the new 2022 to Batman movie. At least if you're planning on getting the iconic villains that are going to be showing up in that movie, whether it be Penguin, Catwoman, and then of course the man himself, Batman, along with his Batcycle. Riddler is definitely needed to complete that collection. Otherwise, it just falls down to a matter of preference. But if you guys do want to get your own, make sure to use the affiliate links in the description below. It helps out the channel quite a bit. And if you guys want to see another McFarlane Toys review, check out the one showing up on screen right now. As always, guys, stay humble, and I'll see you on the next video.